The story of Rush begins not in the neon-lit stages of arenas, but in the dimly lit, scuffed basements of suburban Toronto in the mid-1960s. Here, in the quiet neighborhood of Willowdale, a young Alex Lifeson, born Alexander Zevojinovic, was tinkering with his guitar, inspired by the soaring harmonies of the Beatles and the raw grit of the Rolling Stones. His teenage world was a patchwork of transistor radios, vinyl records, and relentless curiosity about the new sonic frontier being paved by the likes of The Who, Cream, and Jimi Hendrix. In the summer of 1968, Lifeson teamed up with drummer John Rutsey, a fiery and determined counterpart to his exploratory guitar style. The two began playing as a band they called The Projection. Their music, though still embryonic, had the seeds of something ambitious, a blend of heavy blues, riffs, and rock jams that mirrored the electrifying energy of Led Zeppelin's early days. By late 1968, Jeff Jones joined as their bassist, and the trio adopted the name Rush, a suggestion from Rutsey's brother. This initial lineup began playing gigs, but it wasn't long before Jones left to pursue other musical ventures. Enter Gary Lee Weinrib, who went by Geddy Lee, a local bass player and schoolmate of Lifeson. With Lee's unconventional falsetto voice and technical bass skills, the band quickly found a new chemistry. Lee's unique moniker was born out of his mother's thick Polish accent, which transformed Gary into Geddy whenever she called him. By the spring of 1969, Rush expanded to a four-piece with Lindy Young, a guitarist and keyboard player, adding a new texture to their music. But the lineup was fluid, as bands often were in these early stages. That summer, Lee briefly left the group, replaced by Joe Perna, and the band even tried on a new name, Hadrian. Lee, meanwhile, formed his own project, initially named Ogilvy and later Judd. The Toronto music scene was small enough that these experiments often overlapped, and by the fall of 1969, the revolving door of musicians paused as Lifeson, Lee, and Rutsey regrouped under the familiar Rush banner. Rush's first gig under this lineup was in a church basement, a teen-focused coffee house called The Coffin. It wasn't much to look at, just a makeshift stage surrounded by folding chairs, but for the band, it was a proving ground. It was also where they met a scrappy 16-year-old named Ray Daniels, who would become their manager. Daniels was hustling to book any band he could into church basements, high school dances, and other all-ages venues. He saw potential in Rush and became their unofficial promoter, securing gigs wherever he could find them. Their early set list leaned heavily on covers. The Who, Cream, and Led Zeppelin dominated the roster. But as their tastes evolved toward heavier and bluesier rock, they began crafting original material, shifting away from pop-oriented songs that couldn't quite capture the intensity they were chasing. They were loud and unapologetic, a mismatch for the high school dances they played, but perfect for the burgeoning coffeehouse scene. A turning point came in 1971 when Ontario's drinking laws changed, lowering the legal age to 18. This shift opened the door for underage bands like Rush to start playing in bars. They graduated from church basements to the smoky circuits of Ontario's pubs, where the audience was rowdier, the hours longer, and the expectations higher. This was where the band learned endurance, playing for hours on end, honing their craft in a haze of beer-soaked floors and clinking glasses. The transformation of their sound was as much about necessity as it was about ambition. They needed to stand out among the dozens of other bar bands. Lifeson's guitar playing grew sharper, channeling the ferocity of Jimmy Page, while Lee's bass became more aggressive and intricate. Rutsey's drumming was steady and driving, anchoring their evolving style. In 1973, with their reputation growing and a dedicated following beginning to take shape, the band decided it was time to make their mark with a recording. They scraped together the funds for a single, releasing a cover of Buddy Holly's Not Fade Away, paired with an original track, You Can't Fight It. The single, while spirited, failed to generate much attention. Radio stations largely ignored it, and the band grew frustrated with their lack of traction. But this setback only steeled their resolve. By late 1973, Rush entered the studio again, this time with bigger ambitions. They began recording what would become their self-titled debut album. It was raw and unpolished, capturing the essence of their live sound but lacking the finesse they would later achieve. They poured every ounce of their energy into tracks like Finding My Way and Working Man, the latter destined to become an anthem for the blue-collar crowd that would eventually embrace them. Without major label backing, the album seemed destined for obscurity until Ray Daniels and the band decided to take matters into their own hands. They borrowed $400 from Lee's mother to press copies of the album and started their own label, Moon Records. It was a scrappy move, but one that would change their trajectory forever. Rush's self-titled debut album, released in 1974, was more than a collection of songs. It was a declaration of intent. Raw, gritty, and unapologetically heavy, the album captured the band's essence as they were at the time, a bar band with a knack for electrifying riffs and thundering rhythms. It was a snapshot of three young musicians on the brink of something bigger, yet still tethered to their roots in the smoky pubs and sweaty dance halls of Toronto. The album opens with Finding My Way, a track that barrels out of the gate with Alex Lifeson's blistering guitar riff. It was a song soaked in the spirit of Led Zeppelin, but infused with a feral energy that was distinctly Rush. Geddy Lee's high-pitched wail cut through the mix like a siren, while John Rutsey's drumming kept the whole thing grounded. Then there was Working Man, a sprawling 7-minute opus that captured the everyday grit of their working-class fans. It was a jam-heavy monster with Lifeson's lightning-fast solos and Lee's driving bass locking into a groove that hinted at the technical prowess the band would soon fully unleash. While the album showcased their potential, the road to recognition wasn't straightforward. Rush's music was too raw for mainstream radio and too heavy for most record labels. It was Donna Halper, a DJ at Cleveland's WMMS, who became the unlikely catalyst for their breakthrough. She played Working Man during a late-night shift, thinking it would resonate with the station's blue-collar listeners. The response was immediate. Phones lit up with requests, and local record stores couldn't keep the album in stock. Suddenly, Rush wasn't just a Canadian curiosity, they were becoming a name in the U.S. That momentum caught the attention of Mercury Records, who signed the band and re-released the debut album. Rush hit the road, opening for acts like the New York Dolls and ZZ Top, pushing themselves to the limit to make an impression. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the band faced a seismic shift. John Rutsey, the band's original drummer, abruptly decided to leave in July 1974. His departure was a shock to Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson. Rutsey cited health concerns related to his diabetes and a growing disinterest in the band's direction, particularly their increasingly ambitious songwriting. It was a crossroads moment. With the tour already planned, Lee and Lifeson had to find a replacement fast. Enter Neil Peart. At 21, Peart was already an enigma, a towering figure with a wiry frame and an intensity that was as much intellectual as it was physical. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, he had spent his teenage years honing his craft, inspired by the chaotic brilliance of The Who's Keith Moon and the precision of King Crimson's Michael Giles. After a stint in England chasing his musical dreams, which ended in frustration, Peart returned to Canada, disillusioned but still hungry to play. When Peart auditioned for Rush, he didn't just play, he unleashed. His drumming was like nothing Lee and Lifeson had encountered before. Powerful, meticulous, and imaginative. Peart attacked his kit with the precision of a craftsman and the ferocity of a warrior. For Geddy Lee, the decision was instant. This was their guy. Lifeson, however, was more cautious, unsure of Peart's intensity. But as the auditions continued, no one else came close to matching Peart's skill or passion. He was hired. Peart's arrival was transformative. He wasn't just a drummer, he was a thinker. Within days of joining, he began contributing lyrics, a task Lee and Lifeson had reluctantly shared up to that point. Peart's love of literature, philosophy, and science fiction brought a new dimension to their music. Songs like Anthem and Bytor and The Snow Dog were infused with ideas pulled from Ayn Rand and J.R.R. Tolkien, while tracks like Fly By Night captured a spirit of restless individuality. Rush wasted no time incorporating Peart into their lineup. Barely 2 weeks after he joined, they embarked on their first U.S. tour. Traveling in a battered van, packed with gear, the trio crisscrossed the country, playing small venues to audiences who had no idea who they were. Peart, ever the autodidact, spent his downtime reading voraciously, devouring books on philosophy and science that would later shape his lyrics. The addition of Peart marked a shift in their music. His drumming brought a newfound complexity to their sound, turning what had been jam-heavy grooves into intricately structured compositions. Songs became more deliberate, with long instrumental passages that showcased not just technical skill, but a sense of narrative. It wasn't just music, it was storytelling through sound. In 1975, the band released Fly By Night, their first album with Peart. It was a leap forward, both musically and lyrically. The title track, with its soaring melody and introspective lyrics, hinted at the arena-filling anthems they would later produce.
Fly by night away from here. Ship isn't coming and I just can't pretend.
Anthem was a blistering declaration of independence, underpinned by Peart's intricate rhythms and Lifeson's razor-sharp riffs. The album was their first real statement as a band, a testament to their refusal to follow trends or compromise their vision. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their next release, Caress of Steel, was a commercial flop. Its sprawling experimental tracks, including the ambitious 20-minute suite The Fountain of Lamneth, left audiences and critics scratching their heads. The album was dubbed the Down the Tubes Tour by the band, a grim acknowledgement of its lackluster reception. Yet Rush refused to give up. Instead of scaling back, they doubled down on their ambition. The result was 2112, an album that would define their career and solidify their place in rock history. But before they could get there, they had to survive one of the toughest years of their lives. By late 1975, Rush was standing on shaky ground. The commercial failure of Caress of Steel had put immense pressure on the band. Their record label, Mercury, was less than thrilled with the sprawling concept album that critics had panned and fans seemed to overlook. The band members themselves joked about the tour that followed as the Down the Tubes Tour, playing to sparse crowds and half-empty venues. Behind the humor, though, was an unshakable truth. Rush's future was uncertain. The suits at Mercury had a clear message: scale back the ambition. They wanted Rush to write shorter, radio-friendly songs, to strip away the fantastical and experimental in favor of straightforward rock tunes. But this directive didn't sit well with Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson, or Neil Peart. For them, compromising their artistic vision was not an option. If their careers were going to end, they decided they would go out on their own terms. With their backs against the wall, Rush began work on their next album, 2112. The band retreated to Toronto Sound Studios in early 1976, a place where they could channel their frustrations into creativity. It was here that they resolved to throw caution to the wind, crafting an album that doubled down on the elements Mercury wanted them to abandon. The centerpiece of the record would be a 20-minute suite, a bold, sci-fi-inspired epic that would take up the entire first side of the album. Neil Peart, as the band's newly established lyricist, was at the heart of 2112's conceptual ambition. He drew inspiration from Ayn Rand's Anthem, a novella exploring themes of individualism and defiance against collectivist oppression. Peart's lyrics for 2112 told the story of a dystopian future where creativity and free will had been crushed under the weight of an authoritarian regime. In this world, music itself had been outlawed until a solitary protagonist discovers an ancient guitar and sparks a rebellion through sound. The title suite was nothing short of a declaration of independence for the band. Musically, it was a whirlwind of dynamic shifts and instrumental prowess. Lee's bass lines provided a muscular backbone, while his high-pitched vocals captured the desperation and defiance of the protagonist. Peart, as always, was a force of nature behind the drum kit, blending technical precision with an almost cinematic sense of drama. The remaining tracks on 2112's second side showcased the band's range and versatility. Songs like A Passage to Bangkok and Something for Nothing balance hard rock riffs with intricate arrangements, while The Twilight Zone and Lessons offered glimpses of the band's lyrical playfulness and evolving sound. Every track felt purposeful, as though the band was pouring every ounce of their creative energy into this make-or-break moment. When 2112 was released in April 1976, it was a gamble of epic proportions. Mercury Records, while skeptical, begrudgingly agreed to release the album. The band, in turn, braced themselves for the possibility that it might be their last. What they didn't anticipate was the reaction that would follow. Critics may have remained skeptical, but Rush's fans, those loyal audiences who had followed them through dive bars and opening slots, embraced 2112 with fervor. The album's conceptual depth and unabashed ambition struck a chord, particularly with the kind of listeners who were looking for something more cerebral in their rock music. The title track became an anthem for anyone who felt the weight of conformity, a rallying cry for individuality and artistic freedom. Sales of 2112 surged, particularly in Canada and the US, and the album eventually went gold. It wasn't just a lifeline for Rush, it was proof that they could succeed on their own terms. The band celebrated with a headlining tour, playing mid-sized arenas and auditoriums filled with fans who knew every word to the sprawling title track. For the first time, they had not just an audience, but a community. Perhaps most crucially, 2112 gave Rush the freedom they had fought so hard for. Mercury, seeing the album's success, stopped pressuring them to conform to mainstream trends. From this point forward, the band was in control of their creative destiny. As the dust settled, Rush reflected on what they had achieved. 2112 was not just a turning point in their career, it was a manifesto, a promise that they would always prioritize artistry over compromise. The album's success also marked the beginning of their transition from hard rockers to pioneers of progressive rock, a genre where they would leave an indelible mark. But Rush wasn't content to rest on their laurels. Their ambitions had only grown, and they were already looking to the future. With 2112 behind them, the band began exploring a broader sonic palette, drawing inspiration from the progressive rock of Genesis and Yes, and even incorporating acoustic guitars, synthesizers, and orchestral percussion into their sound. Their next move would take them across the Atlantic to record in the UK, where they would create a pair of albums, A Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, that expanded their musical horizons and pushed the boundaries of what a three-piece band could achieve. These records would cement Rush's status as one of rock's most innovative and technically skilled acts. By 1977, Rush was riding the wave of 2112's success, but they weren't content to coast on past achievements. They had a taste for experimentation now, a hunger to push their music into uncharted territory. With their confidence restored and a growing fan base to support them, the band began working on what would become A Farewell to Kings, an album that would take their progressive rock ambitions to the next level. For the first time, Rush left North America to record, choosing Rockfield Studios in Wales. The rural setting provided a stark contrast to the urban grind of Toronto and offered a kind of creative sanctuary where the band could focus entirely on their craft. The bucolic surroundings even crept into the album's sound. There's an expansiveness and organic quality to A Farewell to Kings that wasn't as pronounced on their earlier work. Neil Peart, always the scholar, had been delving into mythology, philosophy, and literature during his downtime, and these influences seeped into his lyrics. The album's title track opens with a delicate acoustic intro that feels like a medieval ballad, before exploding into a dynamic blend of soaring guitar riffs and intricate rhythms. The song is a lament for lost ideals, contrasting the corruption of modern leadership with a yearning for nobler times. It was a bold, cerebral statement that set the tone for the album. And then there was Xanadu. Inspired by Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, the song is a sprawling 11-minute odyssey that takes listeners on a journey through lush soundscapes and shifting time signatures. Geddy Lee's haunting vocals and Alex Lifeson's shimmering guitar work create an almost cinematic experience, while Peart's drumming weaves it all together with surgical precision. It was a technical marvel, a song that demonstrated just how far Rush had come since their bar band days. But it wasn't all myth and grandeur. The album's breakout track, Closer to the Heart, showcased a more melodic and accessible side of Rush.
Closer to the heart.
Clocking in at under 3 minutes, the song was a concise yet powerful anthem of unity and self-determination. It resonated deeply with fans, becoming a staple of their live shows and a rare moment of radio-friendly accessibility for a band that thrived on complexity. This is part 1 of 3 videos on the career and legacy of Rush. Make sure to catch the next 2 episodes. I also have a series out on Eddie Van Halen, covering his early days, the Roth years, the Hagar years, and his final days. I left the links in the description. To my subs, I appreciate you. Thanks for keeping me motivated and for your excellent comments. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe, join the family. Also, kindly smack that like button so the world knows a bit more about Rush. Thanks for watching.